The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. We're just going to give everyone maybe another few seconds to join, and then we'll start the presentation. Okay, I think we'll get started. So hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for attending this webinar. My name is Jessica Orrego, and I am part of the Art Secretariat team at Winrock International. We're really excited that so many people could join today, and we look forward to sharing the details of the TREES standard with you. While a lot of work has gone into developing the current version of the draft standard, we are eager to receive your questions and comments and suggestions to help ensure the standard is the best it can be prior to its finalization. As many of you know, the standard was posted on the ART website for public consultation on July 29th. We encourage all of you to submit comments during the public comment period, which ends on September 27th. Before we begin, I just need to cover some webinar logistics. We will answer questions at the end of the session after the presentation is completed. However, you're welcome to submit questions at any time during the webinar by using the chat feature, which is at the bottom of the webinar screen that you have there, the webinar pane. Please type in your question and submit. We'll be compiling questions and comments throughout the webinar, but in some cases we may group questions on related topics in order to be able to address the largest number of questions as possible. If we don't get to your question today, we'll try to respond to you in the next few days. And if you submit a comment today, it will be logged with all other public comments submitted to us during the consultation period, and responses will be published following the end of the public comment period. And as a final note, the webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on the ART website in the coming days. So to start off, we'd like to provide a short background of the ART program. The Architecture for REDD Plus Transactions, or ART, as we will refer to it, is a voluntary carbon program established to register, verify, and issue REDD Plus emission reduction credits to participant countries, with a goal to attract REDD Plus finance at scale. ART is an independent program, and it is more than simply a new REDD Plus standard. It includes a governance structure independently led and managed by globally recognized experts acting in their personal capacity. The key goals of ART are to recognize force countries and jurisdictions that deliver high quality emission reductions by reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. ART aims to ensure the environmental and social integrity and ambition of REDD Plus emission reductions, and it provides a pathway for REDD Plus investment by attracting finance from both voluntary and regulated carbon markets, private entities, and countries. ART is a voluntary program that wants to recognize good work. Participation provides countries an opportunity to access markets and financing that might not otherwise be available. ART builds upon the significant work of REDD Plus initiatives and programs, but promotes greater ambition and includes more prescribed requirements related to the verification, safeguards, and registration. ART will issue independently verified, serialized REDD+ emission reduction credits on a registry system. ART was established by an interim steering committee referred to as the ISC. The ISC guided the selection of the Secretariat, appointed the ART board members, and guided the development of the REDD+ Environmental Excellency Standard, which we refer to as TREES. The ISC has now handed over the leadership of ART to the ART board. The ART board will provide strategic guidance and ensure the program's environmental and social integrity. The board will oversee implementation of the ART program and ensure that it is in accordance with emerging UNFCCC processes. The board will also ensure strong governance, transparency, and processes that assure quality and adequate safeguards. The ART Secretariat, which is hosted by Winrock International, is responsible for the operation of the ART program, including the development of the TREES standard and associated verification requirements, and developing a registry platform. The Secretariat will oversee the implementation of the ART program, including the registration, verification, and issuance of board-approved TREES emission reductions on the ART registry. In addition, 3 expert committees provided invaluable input during the development of the draft version of TREES. These committees include the TREES Standard Committee, the TREES Verification Committee, and the TREES Safeguard Committee. More information about the members of these committees, including their bios, is available on the ART website. The Interim Steering Committee adopted 6 immutable principles to guide ART and the development of the TREES standard. We will briefly review them here, but you'll see how these were operationalized when you read through the standard. The first principle is to recognize countries with quantifiable emission reductions from slowing, halting, and reversing forest cover loss. This includes recognizing high forest, low deforestation countries. The second is to ensure consistency with UNFCCC COP decisions, including the Paris Agreement, the Warsaw Framework, and the Cancun Safeguards. This means that TREES does not conflict with these decisions, but in some cases, TREES may go beyond UNFCCC decisions. Indeed, TREES has more specific requirements around eligibility, establishing crediting levels, and calculating emission reductions in order to be transparent and create fungible emission reductions. The third principle is to embody high environmental integrity. ART will also promote national ambition and contribute to Paris Agreement goals, including progress towards NDCs. Also, ART will credit emission reductions at the national level or subnational level as an interim measure. And finally, TREES will set crediting baselines that initially reflect historical emission levels and thereafter will decline periodically to require higher ambition over time. So now onto the standard itself. The ART principles guided the development of TREES, which is the standard and that defines how participants can generate offset credits under ART. This presentation provides a general overview of the standard, but we definitely encourage you to read the entire text, which is available on the ART website. TREES includes the required technical elements as well as environmental, social, and governance safeguard requirements, verification requirements, and provisions to avoid double counting. We will review each of these topics over the course of this presentation. A key requirement of TREES is that participants using TREES must be a national government. The national government may register a subnational accounting area which meets certain eligibility requirements until 2025, at which time the participant must transition to a national scale accounting area. We'll review the subnational accounting area requirements next. So as I mentioned, subnational accounting areas are permitted until 2025, provided that certain eligibility criteria are met. The boundaries of subnational accounting must correspond with one or more administrative jurisdictions, no more than one administrative level down from national level. The subnational accounting areas must encompass an area of at least 6 million hectares or encompass an area of at least 4 million hectares if they represent at least 30% of the national forest area. The tree subnational accounting area must include all forest areas within the boundaries of the participating subnational jurisdictions, and legal responsibility for forest-related policymaking must rest with the subnational governmental authorities or be shared between such authorities and the national government. So participants will determine the number of emission reduction credits by first determining the crediting level, then subtracting annual emissions, and then subtracting the required buffer pool contribution, adjusting for uncertainty if necessary, and in cases where the accounting area is subnational, take a deduction for leakage. We will go through these steps in more detail. The emission reductions and supporting data and documentation and calculations are then independently verified for conformance against trees. Upon approval by the ARP board, the Secretariat will then issue serialized emission reduction credits to the country in its registry account. The initial crediting level is established by calculating the 10-year historical average of emissions. The 10-year period must end directly prior to the start of the crediting period. In instances where appropriate data is available, the crediting period may begin up to 4 years prior to the date that participants submit initial documentation to ART. Each crediting period is 5 years in length. Following the initial crediting period, the previous crediting level must be reduced by an automatic 20% in order to determine the new crediting level for each subsequent crediting period. Annual emissions are monitored and reported as outlined in the tree standard. Trees provides an uncertainty allowance of 15% in both the crediting level data and the annual emissions data. If the uncertainty for the crediting level exceeds 15%, the crediting level must be reduced by the corresponding amount. If the uncertainty for the annual emissions exceeds 15% uncertainty, the annual emissions total must be increased by the corresponding amount. The two calculations are independent, and a participant may be within the allowance for one, but not the other. If a participant submits a subnational accounting area, a leakage assessment must be conducted. Trees includes 4 categories for leakage based on the percentage of a nation's forest included in the subnational accounting area, with corresponding leakage deductions ranging between 0 and 20%. If the accounting area includes more than 90% of the national forests, no leakage deduction is taken. So trees defines a reversal to be when a participant's annual emissions exceed its crediting level. Trees requires participants to contribute a percentage of generated emissions reductions at each issuance into a program-wide buffer pool to act as insurance against future reversals. The amount of the contribution is based on the risk of a reversal occurring. The maximum risk rating under trees is 25%, but this can be lowered through 2 mitigating options. First, if a participant has legislation or executive decrees that are actively implemented and demonstrably supporting REDD Plus activities, a 5% reduction is applied. And second, if the participant can demonstrate low annual variability of forest emissions, a 10% reduction is applied. If a participant experiences a reversal, credits from the buffer pool are retired to compensate for the amount of emissions associated with the reversal. The participant then increases its contribution to the buffer pool each year by 5% following a reversal. If a participant completes 2 crediting periods without any reversals, the buffer pool credits will begin to be returned each year. For example, in year 11, after no reversals, the participant would receive the buffer pool contribution from year 1. And in year 12, it would receive the buffer pool contribution from year 2, and so on. If a participant leaves ART at any time, it forfeits all remaining buffer pool contributions. These will be retired to compensate for any possible future reversals the participant may have when not monitored under ART. At the highest level, all REDD Plus activities under trees must be conducted in accordance with the Cancun safeguards. However, the Tree Safeguard Committee recognized that this is a very broad statement and additional information is needed to be able to effectively implement and report on safeguards. Based on an extensive review of current REDD Plus initiatives and country summary of information reports, as well as the committee's knowledge of national level safeguard implementation, they unpacked the Cancun safeguards into 14 key thematic safeguard areas. Each theme has a structure, process, and outcome indicator. This is intended to mirror the steps countries are using in establishing their national safeguard systems to address and respect all aspects of the Cancun safeguards. Participants can use their summary of information reports, as well as their safeguard information systems, once fully implemented, to monitor and report on the safeguards under trees, although other forms of reporting will be permitted as well. In the first crediting period, participants must conform with all structure indicators. In addition, they must either conform with or provide a plan for conforming with the process and outcome indicators. And then conformance with all indicators must be demonstrated by the first verification of the second crediting period. ART supports rewarding countries that have achieved very low deforestation rates by allowing crediting for removals. Establishing a reference level for removals still needs to be further explored. It was not included in this version of trees to prevent delays in the launch of ART. ART does plan to include an approach for crediting removals when deforestation and degradation emissions are below the crediting baseline in the next version of trees. Similarly, ART supports rewarding high forest, low deforestation countries that maintain low rates of deforestation. While HFLD countries can use trees as written, we recognize that they will generate very low numbers of emission reduction credits. ART intends to establish an approach to credit HFLDs beyond historical levels for continued low deforestation. However, as an interim measure, countries meeting the definition of HFLD will be eligible to have their issued credits tagged to allow for greater visibility to the market and to buyers. The TREES standard requires validation to occur after year 1 of each 5-year crediting period, and verification must occur after years 1, 3, and 5 of each crediting period. Verification will be optional following years 2 and 4 of each crediting period. However, no credits can be issued without verification. Validation and verifications will be conducted in accordance with the TREES Validation and Verification Standard, which is currently under development. Validation and verification bodies, or VVBs, will be required to be accredited by an international accreditation forum organization, and they will be required to submit an application to be an approved VVB under ART. The application will focus on whether the VVB has the appropriate competencies and resources to perform validations and verifications for ART. While the Secretariat will oversee the approval of VVBs to perform validations and verifications under ART, each participant country will oversee the request for bids and selection of the VVB it wishes to use. In addition, the VVB will contract directly with the participant. A conflict of interest assessment will also be required prior to work beginning and will be approved by the Secretariat to ensure an objective and third-party audit. The Secretariat will conduct initial and ongoing training for all VVBs And we'll also hold periodic meetings for discussion of verification issues that emerge. And this will be to ensure consistency of interpretation and implementation across all VVBs. ART will establish an online logic-based registry system that will be tailor-made to manage the ART process and documentation flow. This will be managed by the ART Secretariat. ART participants will open accounts and have login access that will have functionality including, for example, the ability to upload trees documentation, transfer and retire emission reduction credits, and select verifiers. The registry will also be made publicly available to enable stakeholders to see trees documentation, credit issuances, and credit status. The Secretariat will issue serialized credits into country registry accounts for a subsequent transfer or retirement. So what's next? We've reached the end of our presentation. I want to remind all of you that the public comment period for the current trees draft will end on September 27th. The draft is available on the ART website, and we encourage you all to submit comments to the email address listed here on this slide. Comments will be compiled and responses will be posted on the ART website. The ART board will approve changes to the trees standard based on comments received. We plan for the final version of the tree standard to be adopted by the ART board prior to COP25. We also wanted to share that we will be in New York City for the UN Climate Action Summit in September. And events will be announced on the ART listserv, so please sign up to receive ART emails on our website if you're interested in receiving more information about these events or general ART announcements. So thank you again to everyone here who participated in today's webinar. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to a couple of my colleagues, Mary Grady and Christy Majorkirth, who will take some of your questions. And again, all questions that are not answered today will be answered either over the next few days or will be included in our responses at the end of the public comment period. And as a final reminder, a recording of this webinar will be available on the ART website soon. Thanks again, and over to you, Mary and Christy.
Thanks, Jessica. And thank you everybody for joining our webinar today. We have some questions coming in and working to group some of them together here. So Christy, I will first direct the question of what is the value of ART versus other programs such as the UNFCCC and the World Bank's Forest Carbon Partnership Facility?
Sure, thanks Mary, and hello everyone, and my thanks as well for attending. So thank you for starting with a nice challenging question. I think at the highest level, ART is attempting to target and attract scalable finance for REDD+ from the private sector, which separates it from the other programs that you mentioned.
Okay. Were baseline approaches other than the 10-year historical average considered?
So yes, all of the elements within the standard were carefully thought through, and many options were considered before the draft was prepared. For the baseline approaches, the Secretariat prepared analyses of several options for the interim steering committee to review to decide how to establish and update the trees crediting level. The decision was made to base the initial crediting level on the 10-year historical average because it's consistent with other programs and rewards early actors. That being said, if any attendees or your colleagues feel a different approach is better, we very much welcome your suggestions and would appreciate your submitting comments of suggested approaches and the reasons behind the suggestion that we can provide to the ART board as they conduct their review and consider changes to the standard.
So related to that question, and I guess building on it, is one, does trees allow for country-specific circumstances to be used to adjust the crediting level after the historical average is calculated?
Another good question. So the simple answer is no. All participants are required to use the 10-year historical average as the initial crediting level. The goal was to make the requirements more consistent across all the participants and more transparent than for the market stakeholders. We also thought that that would simplify the verification process. But this is definitely an instance, as Jessica mentioned, where trees requirements are more specific than the UNFCCC approaches that are allowed. So again, we welcome comments and feedback on this approach.
So after trees is finalized in December, when can countries that are interested apply?
Sure, so they'll be able to apply right away. As soon as the ART board adopts the finalized standard, ART will be, I guess, open for business and countries can apply immediately.
I guess also related to that, how much additional work will be required to join ART for a country that is already participating in an existing REDD+ program?
Sure, so I will say that without really knowing the specifics of what work a country has already conducted, it's a little challenging to give a definitive answer to that question. We anticipate that some additional work will be required since trees has specific requirements for registration and verification, for example, that other programs may not have. But we would anticipate that much of the work a country has done to estimate, for example, emissions factors and activity data, and forest inventory work or some of the national safeguard systems work should all be able to be used under trees. So it should be able to build on what they've already done, but we would anticipate some additional work being required.
So here is one about the private sector. So what is the role of the private sector in the ART system? How are nested REDD projects handled in the countries that participate in ART?
Another excellent question. So as everyone heard, the requirements under trees are for quantifying REDD+ emissions reductions at a subnational and a national scale. ART firmly believes that countries should and must work with public and private stakeholders if we're going to achieve the results necessary to curb the effects of climate change. As such, trees does not include specific requirements for how projects or project level activities would have to be nested or incorporated or somehow rolled up. The goal was to provide countries with flexibility to really create their own incentives for project and subnational REDD activities rather than our prescribing approach. Our hope is that this flexibility will enable countries to develop the approach that works best for them and for their private sector investors, and that it would continue to encourage both public and private investment in REDD within countries.
So will ART require some kind of accounting for credits transferred for use outside of the host country towards an emission reduction target?
Yes, so trees does have explicit double counting provisions included in the standard, which I would encourage everyone to read. There's a lengthy section on those. So in this case, trees would require that the host country issue a letter that would explicitly authorize the use of the emissions reduction credits by another country or entity. So the letter would need to state that the country would report the transfer to the UNFCCC and that the country would make an adjustment in its inventory reports. The letters would be included in the ART documentation that would be available in the ART registry as well, just to support the need for transparency, and so people could see that those had been accounted for appropriately.
So can a subnational jurisdiction that's smaller than a minimum hectare threshold stated in the standard still participate in ART?
Great. So the standard requires participants to be national governments. However, as you heard, subnational accounting areas can be submitted prior to 2025. We do have the size criteria in the standard. If a subnational jurisdiction were beneath the requirements or it was too small, it would be possible for it to join with other subnational jurisdictions to form a large enough accounting area to meet the eligibility requirement. So it would not be able to participate on its own through the national government, but it could join with other subnational jurisdictions to meet the minimum thresholds.
And so why was 2025 selected as the transition date from subnational to national accounting areas?
Another good question. So as I mentioned before, there were lots of considerations and discussions that went into defining these requirements. Several potential dates were considered for when to require the transition to national accounting. The 2025 date was considered most consistent with the overall ambition of ART to promote national accounting and national scale. When selecting that date, though, the interim steering committee did request the input from the various expert committees to try to decide what date might be the best one to use. Based on that information, the ISC thought that it would be possible for countries to have national level accounting by 2025. I should note, though, that there is a difference between having national level accounting and having national level REDD Plus activities. The ISC recognized that conducting activities at a national level may take longer to implement, but in general felt that most countries could have national level greenhouse gas accounting by 2025. As with all of these questions, however, if you have feedback or suggestions of alternative approaches, we very much welcome your comments on this as well.
Okay, so you mentioned a crediting level adjustment after the first year of 20%. How was the 20% adjustment decided?
Yes, so this was another area where there was a lot of consideration. In looking at the overall environmental ambition of ART to being to achieve near zero deforestation in a relatively short time frame, 20%, the 20% adjustment was considered the adjustment level needed to achieve that goal. But again, I will throw out that we welcome feedback and comments and suggestions of alternative approaches if people have different ideas of how we should be approaching this.
Okay, how is permanence ensured in this program?
These are all great questions. Thank you guys for submitting so many. Permanence. So ART is a voluntary program. So we are not going to be able to enforce monitoring if a participant were to leave the program. However, what we have required is that if a participant does leave the program, they would forfeit all of their buffer pool contributions. So all the buffer pool credits that still remained. And we would immediately retire all of the remaining buffer pool contributions to act as insurance against any potential future reversal that that participant might have.
And another technical question on the uncertainty threshold. So why was 15% selected as the uncertainty threshold?
Sure. So the 15% was set following a review of what uncertainty levels were reported in publicly available national inventory data. When we saw what the reported levels were, we felt that 15% was an ambitious but achievable goal to include. Again, we welcome feedback from stakeholders on this item as well, but it seems plausible and achievable. I should mention, however, that we also are aware that there are many groups currently looking at how to best calculate uncertainty for both REDD+ projects and other offset project types. And we will continue to follow their work very closely so that we can make sure that trees reflects the best practice in calculating uncertainty as new approaches might emerge from that.
So there's an observation that the standard currently focuses only on some REDD+ activities. How would a country report under trees if they're implementing activities that are not yet covered?
Great. So as Jessica mentioned, ART does plan to include an approach for quantifying and receiving credits for removals soon. It is not in this version of trees, but we do anticipate it being in a revision fairly shortly. Until the standard is revised, however, a country could still participate simply without quantifying or receiving credits for emissions removals or emission reductions from the removals. Once the standard has been approved with the new removals approach included, the country could add the emissions reductions from removals moving forward. There has been discussion about allowing a look-back period when removals are added so that countries could look backwards basically and include removals from the time frame since they've joined ART. So if it's your second year, that you could go back and claim ERs associated with removals for the last 2 years. That would be decided and included as part of the revised standard.
So I guess a couple of questions related to that as well. So you mentioned that ART would in the future be addressing tropical forest countries that have not been high deforesters. So how will that work, and when do we expect this revision for the HFLD countries to be published?
Yes, so again, the tree standard could be used by all countries right now, and that would include countries that are categorized as high forest, low deforestation countries. For those that haven't had a chance to read the standard yet, I should mention that HFLD within trees is defined as countries that have in excess of 50% forest cover and an annual deforestation rate that is under 0.22%. So that is what we're categorizing as HFLD. We do understand and completely recognize that HFLD countries using the standard currently are going to likely receive fewer emissions reduction credits than high deforestation countries. Which is why we do have the ability for HFLD countries to have their credits tagged to allow improved visibility to both the market and the buyers. Again, to make sure that I'm being clear, so by tagging, we mean adding a special additional designation in the ART registry that would allow the emissions reduction credits to be found as HFLD country credits. Not implying that the credits are any different. All ART credits would be equivalent, but we hope that the tag would make the credits more accessible to buyers who specifically wanted to support HFLD countries in particular. Again, was mentioned in the presentation, though I should say that the intent of ART is that this is an interim solution only. So we plan to continue to work to determine an approach that would explicitly address this category and credit HFLD countries beyond historical levels. The goal would be to make it a manner consistent and fungible with credits from other sectors or that would be recognized by emissions reduction markets. So this would be another revision coming in the future.
So who will review the country's reference level? Is this a UNFCCC process or done by trees experts?
So as we mentioned, ART is a voluntary program outside of the UNFCCC, so they would not be involved in reviewing the crediting levels at all. The trees crediting levels would be validated and verified as part of the third-party validation and verification using the VVBs as mentioned in the presentation. And the ART Secretariat would, to a certain extent, also review it during the documentation review.
Great. There's a question about who makes up the ART board.
Sure. So as Jessica mentioned, the names and bios of everybody on the ISC, the board, within the Secretariat, and also the expert committees are on the website. So in brief, the ART board chair is going to be Francis Seymour. We also have Carlos Nobre, Pavan Sukhdev, Bill Bumpers, Dan Zarin, Abdon Nababan, and Agnes Kalabata are our initial board members.
Great, and those are all on our website. So.
Correct.
Okay. How is ART engaging with the International Civil Aviation Organization's CORSIA?
Sure. So at the moment, ART does not have an approved final standard. So we are certainly planning to apply to be an eligible credit provider under emissions unit provider under CORSIA, but we would do that once the program is active and the standard is finalized.
So this is switching over a couple of questions on safeguards. You stated that the safeguard requirements were based on Cancun safeguards. Did you also consider other safeguard frameworks that exist?
Yes. So obviously the Cancun safeguards provide the foundation for the environmental, social, and governance safeguard section. However, prior to developing the themes and indicators that we included, the Safeguards Technical Committee conducted a really tremendous amount of analysis. They looked at all of the relevant safeguard frameworks that are currently in use by other programs, as well as did a detailed analysis of all of the available summary of information reports to understand how countries are interpreting the Cancun safeguards. And I should mention that the Safeguards Committee has extensive personal experience both as safeguard negotiators and or technical assistance providers. So between the various committee members, they had over 40 countries represented and were quite familiar with how they had been approaching safeguards as well. So all of those fed into the development of the themes and the indicators and our attempt to unpack the Cancun safeguards to make it a little more transparent and manageable for implementing and reporting.
Does trees include a requirement for a benefit sharing plan?
So this is something that the committee discussed at quite some length. really whether we should include a national level benefit sharing plan requirement. So it's not a Cancun safeguard requirement per se, but it was an area that the committee considered going above and beyond the Cancun safeguards. In the end, the committee elected not to include a requirement for the plan for a few reasons. I think first was really that including a benefit sharing plan requirement seems to be a prescriptive and a more of a procedural requirement that wasn't in line with the overall intent to have safeguards requirements that were in place but did not require that they be met in a specific manner or through a specific process. We were really trying to respect the autonomy of countries to define how they were going to meet the safeguards requirements. Another concern that the committee had was that benefit sharing plans often put the focus on the money and the compensation involved. So they recognized that stakeholders might want and receive non-monetary benefits, and so there should be the opportunity for those to be included as well and defined as part of the participatory REDD Plus, I guess, activity development process. So, the idea would be that stakeholders should be part of defining what benefits they receive from the different activities. Another concern was that experience to date in SCPF and some other programs have shown how complicated developing these types of plans at that high of a level can get. And so again, we wanted to leave it to the country to determine which which administrative level made the most sense for plans to be developed and implemented at. And I guess finally, I would say that the idea was that the intent of the benefit sharing plan requirement would be to ensure fair and equitable use of the proceeds from the REDD Plus monies. Fundamentally. So we felt that that would be covered through some of the other criteria and indicators that were in the proposed standard. So it wasn't necessary to have a separate indicator for that.
Okay. So I think we'll do one more, and then we'll probably just respond to other questions in writing, the ones that we haven't had a chance to get to. So there's a question about price. Do the sellers get to set their price, or how does the pricing work?
Sure. So I guess first I will say that ART is not defining the price. So the goal is to generate credits that are fungible within the marketplace. So similar to, I guess, general market principles, the sellers would define the price and the market would set the price. We are not putting any requirements from ART anyway on what a floor price should be or anything like that. It would be up to the sellers and the market to determine the price.
Great, thanks, Christy. Okay, well, thank you everybody very much for participating today. If we did not get to your question on the webinar, we'll respond to you in writing. And as noted, the comments that were received today will be logged as part of the official process for stakeholder consultation. In addition to that, we strongly encourage you to submit formal comments to us by the end of September. At the email address is red@winrock.org. Thank you very much.